We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Today on the Rock Art Podcast, episode 31, you're going to hear from David Sucec, who's director of the Barrier Canyon Style Rock Art Project out of Utah. You're in for a real treat. 31 years of study of the rock art. Glad to have you aboard. Well, welcome everyone. We've had a bit of a hiatus between my last podcast and this one, but I'm back, and welcome back to the Rock Art Podcast. I think you'll all be excited about hearing from our guest scholar, and he's a gentleman by the name of David Sucec. He's director of the Barrier Canyon Style Visual Project. He's a visual artist. He's a world-class photographer and a rock art scholar. David, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to have you. Where are you hailing from as we speak?
Salt Lake City, Utah.
And you call that your home, and how long have you been out there?
I've been out here about 45 years. I'm still kind of a newcomer because I don't belong to the church. The church is the LDS church.
Yes, of course.
It controls most of the official stuff on the state. Actually, I probably wouldn't live here because of that, because it's a very conservative state. And
sure.
I think it many times mean-hearted and hurtful, but this is where the canyons are.
Right.
This is where the Barrier Canyon style is.
Utah is known for a lot of things, but it has some of the most gorgeous scenery and landscape that probably can be seen in the country of the United States. And certainly it has quite a remarkable record of prehistoric rock drawings and rock paintings, doesn't it?
It does. It's loaded. I don't think there's any state in the Union which has as much. There might be some as almost as much, but we just have tons of it. And we have stuff that goes back, if the dates that we have are correct, at least 9,000 years. Of course, we have Clovis points, which go back further than that. And there are people here who say that there's pre-Clovis stuff here, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was.
Well, yes, and as some of our listeners might know, there is a tremendous record of the indigenous people, the Native Americans, of course, going back 13, 14, 15,000 years in North America now. And so we have that record to work with. And then we have a visual record, don't we, David? Perhaps give a thumbnail sketch of, your expertise and your background and how you ever came to entertain the notion of studying and documenting Barrier Canyon rock art and rock art in general, perhaps anthropology and archaeology. Please.
My interest started really when I was in high school. I was in the Explorer or Scout troop in San Diego, La Mesa, right outside San Diego. And we were backpacking, and we spent the night in these big granite boulders. And right where we were camping, although they wouldn't let you do it now, there were some red paintings, which were probably not really old, but probably 1,000, maybe older than that. And why the rest of the explorers didn't pay much attention to them, and it really fascinated me. I went on to get my master's in painting and drawing with a minor in art history at San Francisco State University. And when I would come out here to visit in Utah, my ex-wife lived here. I would try to see what I could, but I really didn't see much. But in 1975, we moved here from Virginia just to see where to go next. And of course, I've stayed here ever since. And in 1976, I was looking at rock art, and I was told about the Great Gallery. And I went down there, and I was really quite amazed at the work there. And I realized, looking at it, that the individuals who did much of that work, those paintings and some peckings, were not just making images to tell stories or narratives, because stick figures can do that as well as other kind. But they were really into the process of making the painting, the process of painting. So I saw painting with brushes. I saw painting that was sprayed out of the mouth. I saw incising through the wet paint. I saw hand kind of dabbing. I saw many types of techniques. And I knew from being in Utah that the type of painting that was going on after the European Americans got here was pretty minimal in technique. They only were making images, and their way of painting, the process of painting, the techniques of painting were minimal. So it wasn't until about the 1960s that art and painting and making images on flat surfaces really took off and became interested in the process of painting as well as the narrative. So here I am looking at these paintings, which were thousands of years old, I thought, and they were doing more creative, more interesting type of image making than most 100 of years of European American painting in Utah. Because that was the training I had, what we call abstract expressionist or action painting. People like Jackson Pollock and Bill de Kooning and Arshel Gorky and Franz Klein, people like that I was interested in that. So here I was seeing these old paintings with the same kind of range of techniques and process of image making that I'd seen in the 50s and 60s.
So I think what you're saying is that Native people had a very advanced and sophisticated perspective, both in terms of their methods and perhaps in terms of the technique, and even, you might say, subject matter. Am I correct?
Yes, I think so. I think they were interested in how you make images and not just making an image for whatever meaning it had. Now, we have another culture in Utah that stretches over to the Sierra Nevadas, the Paiutes, and the Paiutes had the same lifestyle that the Barrier Canyon people did, seasonal rounds in the warmer country in the winters and the higher country in the summers, and they harvested and all of the kinds of animals and plants that the Barrier Canyon people did. Yet when you look at their imagery in Utah and Nevada, it's very minimal. It looks like they just didn't care much to make it. My guess is they probably didn't have, their existence was difficult, and they had to put all of their energy and creativity in making sure they survived. When you get down to the southern part of Paiutes, the much more interesting imageries, they must have had life better. But here, the Great Gallery and the Barrier Canyon style people really are doing these beautiful 7 feet tall paintings, and paintings high up, sometimes 20, 30 feet. Obviously, they had to have some kind of ladder or scaffolding. All of these kind of things show that they put a lot of value on making these images. And I'm not saying they all made them, of course. I think in the Archaic, which we're really talking about 7,000 BCE to about 300 CE, what they were doing were really probably the best of anything around. You'd have to go down to Pecos to get something equally as sophisticated, and then Baja, although their images aren't quite as sophisticated as Pecos and Barrier Canyon. And then we have the stuff around Grand Canyon, the Esplanade style, and some of those are very sophisticated and well done, but others are not so well done. The quality of the imagery, the execution of the imagery, the sophistication and the elegance of the forming of the figures are so amazing. And when you compare them, say, like to the Utes, where anybody could make an image, and so you get sometimes very beautifully rendered images, but other times very childlike and not in a good way. Then you have to think, at least I had to think, that only a few people were making images in the Barrier Canyon style.
So I think what you're saying is that during certain periods of time, we can call it the Archaic, I guess, or I know there's the late, the middle, and early Archaic, but there's a style of rock art that is fabulously interesting, very impressive in its execution and its subject matter. And it, in fact, excels in its decorative technique, its subject matter, its elegance, etc., even from the more recent episodes of rock art production. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you went, you can see something sometimes equivalent in Pueblo and Basket Maker. The competency is there. But to see the sophistication in Pueblo, you really have to be looking at Kiva wall paintings. And there you see an amazing sophistication in rendering the images.
Well, let's take a moment because maybe some of our listeners don't know what a Barrier Canyon style rock art picture is all about. Why don't you give us a bit of a definition and tell us a bit about how they came up with that name, where they're found, and kind of what they look like and what their subject matter might be, and perhaps even what they date to. How's that?
Well, if people really want to see it, they can Google or search out the Great Gallery in the Canyonlands National Park, and there's many pages on the Great Gallery.
Great.
So they have a good idea. Really, the best comparison with Barrier Canyon style is the Pecos River. They're both an Archaic. Ours, as far as if we have our dates are correct, the earliest dates we have two at about 9,000 years ago. Okay. And they seem to go up to about 1,700 years ago. Although I have seen occasions where image makers have made Barrier Canyon style figures. But most of them were made in the Archaic period.
It's about 2,000 to 9,000 years ago.
Yeah, and Pecos are more colorful. I don't know if you've seen the Pecos stuff.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
You know what they are. They tend to be a little smaller. Barrier Canyon, they have images from 1 inch and length sheep drawn perfectly to figures that are almost 8 feet tall. Like Great Gallery, there's 2 or 3 figures there that are over 7 feet, but most of them tend to be around 4 to 5 feet.
And is this a painted tradition or is it a petroglyph tradition?
Mostly painted. There are scratched figures which are probably 2 to 3 feet high, but they tend to be smaller. And, there could be other ones. The thing about it, we only know and can identify images done in the Barrier Canyon style if there are figures or motifs, because parallel vertical lines are a motif rather than the horizontal parallel lines, which they call a rake. Those, you don't see those in Barrier Canyon, and you don't see the vertical parallel lines in other Archaic styles, a little bit in the Glen Canyon Linear 5, the oldest one, and some in the Esplanade. But that's a motif you see all the time in Barrier Canyon. So if we know that an image looks like it was done at the same time with the same color paint, because I think that red ochre and ochre comes in colors all the way from yellow through orange, through red, through purple, dark purple.
So what colors were used and what was the subject matter of the Barrier Canyon style rock art?
Most of the colors were red ochre. There's white and green and black and blue, but those are very few parts. Sometimes they're just highlights. And you know that if you dig out ochre, it's never uniform. It's not like you get a pigment in a tube of paint at the store or in a can of paint at the store. There's varieties within one little chunk of red ochre. So when you see a slight difference in ochre, then you know that that was painted either at a different time or a different batch of ochre. The imagery that is known as the Barrier Canyon style, and by the way, that term was made by Polly Shasma. She was the first archaeologist who, by the way, is also a very competent watercolorist. And I think the people that really do the best on style and rock art really have a kind of an art or a drawing or a painting background. It's not necessary. It's just a person who is willing to spend the time and look at a lot of stuff can see style pretty easily. But the name came from Horseshoe Canyon.
And where is Horseshoe Canyon?
Horseshoe Canyon is in Wayne County. It's near the Colorado River. And if you know Hanksville, or it's kind of east of Capitol Reef National Park.
Yeah. What part of Utah would that be? North, south, east, west?
Kind of southeast, but a little bit more central than southeast.
Okay.
So Moab lies to its east and Hanksville lies to its west. But the canyon was named after the locals called it Barrier Canyon because there was no way to get across it. And the canyon itself is about 35 miles long.
Oh, my word.
And then when they did uranium mining, they put a couple roads into it, but those are gone now. They don't last unless you keep them up. So they still call it Barrier Creek. So when she went down there, she saw the Great Gallery and she decided that this was not a Fremont. Before that, archaeologists called the images Fremont, which is kind of funny because the Fremont are probably descendants of the Barrier Canyon. That would be like you or me calling our father or grandfather our son.
Right, right.
So she corrected that, and she really started, I thought she really did a much better job in rock art than any of the archaeologists doing at the time. So the imagery that you see are large ghost-like figures. In fact, is the main composition at the Great Gallery, and it's very unique. I think it's not only unique in America, but it's unique in the whole world in rock art. It's a composition that's in 3 dimensions that suggests a 3-dimensional space. But the main part of it is called the Holy Ghost. When the Mormons came, they were polygamous, and they called it Holy Ghost in the Harem. And then the archaeologists started calling it Holy Ghost in Attendance, and that's probably a pretty good name. We just call it the Holy Ghost Group.
I think we have to take a little break. That we packed this first section with a lot of information, and let's see you on the flip-flop.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ROCKART. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
Welcome back to your Rock Art Podcast. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel, your host, and I'm blessed and honored to have David Sucec, director of the Barrier Canyon Style Project, a visual artist of note and a world-class artist and photographer. David, are you with us?
I am with you.
David, it's wonderful to have you on board. We packed that first segment with tremendous amounts of information. And I hope I didn't cut you off at the pass when I had to segue to the next segment.
No, fine. I could probably fill up several hours. We've been working at this for 31 years.
31 years.
Yeah.
So let me ask you the $1 million question. In those 31 years, how much rock art have you documented, and what changes have you seen in your methods or your insights and wisdom about the Barrier Canyon style?
We're not documenting the Barrier Canyon rock art in an archaeological sense. We're doing what we call as a photographic inventory.
Okay.
When I saw the Great Gallery, I wanted to know about this style, and I couldn't find anything. I found a few little things in several different books, but there's no record of this. In fact, there's no complete record of any of the rock art styles in Utah. And I thought, well, it's surely the National Park Service or the BLM or the state historical. No, they have a few things when they're recorded, but they don't have that. Rock art has not really been appreciated for its cultural value. In fact, very few people even heard of the Great Gallery. More people probably in Europe knows about the Great Gallery than people in Utah do. So we wanted to do, when I decided, I said, okay, I need to get a good, serious photographer. And I knew several because I'd been teaching art and doing painting and exhibiting here. And I knew of 3 photographers that were all in the Phillips Gallery where I was showing at the time. And 2 of them, I thought, all 3 of them were good photographers. 2 were excellent in the landscape photography. I finally settled on Craig Law, who is professor emeritus from Utah State University, and he's been working with me the whole time. And he has made some beautiful, clear is important, not just hand shots, but tripod shots, photographs. And some of them could go up to 6 and 8 feet. And eventually we want to get a show in the Museum of Native Americans in D.C. in the Smithsonian. We just haven't got around to it yet. So anyway, let me get back to the style. When we started, there were estimated to be 160 styles or sites with Barrier Canyon style figures. This decade, we have surpassed more than 400 sites. We're probably at about 470 right now. And we have still finding them. On the internet, on Facebook, I see images of Barrier Canyon style figures that I have not seen. I saw 2 today that I had never seen before. So we don't have any money. We even had a grant. We haven't had a grant, even a small one, for 5 years. And then we're all volunteers. We do this because we want to see it done. We think the style is worth it and needs to be done. And I think maybe 100 years from now, people will be glad that we did it because some of these are disappearing. We have vandals that come in, they shoot at it, they scratch it up. One of the sites north of Moab, beautiful red figure, very faint, with a dog with a curved tail facing the figure, which is a BCS compositional motif. Somebody scratched a penis over it. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, it just horrifies you when you see things like that. So our job is really, we see it, is to get a visual record, a good one, so that each image can be seen. And of course, at the Great Gallery, there's more than 84 figures there and probably hundreds of scratched images and figures and plant images. So it's a thing, a labor of love, let's say that. Now, I'm at 83 and Craig is 73. And
oh, my word, I had no idea.
Yeah, and some of the people that go out with us, we have attracted some younger fellows and women, and so they're in their 40s and 50s. And they've helped us. But for probably 25 years, Craig and I were the only 2 that went out. And I enjoyed it. There's nothing I would rather do than go into a canyon that I had never been in before and wander on the walls. It takes a lot of time. But when sometimes you come around a corner and there will be a little panel or an image, and you're standing right where the person who made that image standing. One of the things that one of the traditional Utes, Clifford Duncan, told us is that he felt these things to be sacred, even though he knew they weren't his people. And he said, when you go there, you're standing in the footsteps of the ancients. And boy, I knew what he was talking about right away. And that kind of ambiance, that kind of vibration that you get there is something that you don't get out of books. You don't get out of just talking about it. You have to be there. And boy, if anybody that is interested in rock art, and if you haven't been to the Great Gallery yet, I suggest you do it while you can still hike, because it's about over 3 miles one way.
Yeah.
But it's an easy hike. There hasn't been any cows in the canyons for 40 years.
Wow.
Run into little groups of deer, foxes, other things. It's one of the most marvelous things. And if anybody wants to know about it, they can email me, and I will certainly give them information about it and what they can do.
Are these sites public and available and not protected? Are they open to visitation?
Yes, the Great Galleries in the Canyonlands National Park, the only ones I ever give any information out besides talking about the images are public sites. So we have 3 or 4 really major sites. There's a place called Buckhorn Wash that's over by Castledale, Utah. You can drive right to it. It has a pit toilet, which as a person who has bad knees, I appreciate that. And there's another one north of Moab called Thompson Spring. It's a lot of times misidentified as Sago Canyon. Mm-hmm. But you can go to that, and that's probably the most important multicultural site we have. Okay. It has 2 or 3 different time periods of Barrier Canyon. It has 2 or 3 time periods of Fremont, including the transition from Barrier Canyon to Fremont, because Fremont were probably descendants of Barrier Canyon, like we're descendants of Europeans and Asians and Middle East. And there's Ute stuff there. And there's probably some Paiute stuff in there too. If not that, there's certainly Ute, maybe Shoshone, some people think. I don't know.
So what's been, let's say, one of your most extraordinary experiences, involving your work, your research, your efforts with the Barrier Canyon style? What would you say surprised you the most, or, produced some of the more exciting episodes in your life in association with this project?
Well, of course, my first visit to the Great Gallery, I don't think I've ever gotten over that. I've been back to it more than 20 times. And I still go there, and I still look at the little stuff that I hadn't time to look before. Because, it's like going to a museum. You can only look so long before you're just looking and not taking things in. But I love going back there, and as long as I can hike that 7 miles round trip, I'm going to keep doing it. And I try to do it about every other year, or even sometimes 2 or 3 years. I was part of a group that took Jean Klotz down there. And
yes.
But he wanted to see it again.
Yeah.
So that was really important to me to do that. But let's see, now your question again is
kind of what surprised you found extraordinary, something that really, sung your spirit and really produced some surprising revelations. How's that?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying about the Great Gallery. But, what I said is before that, go down into a canyon I'd never been before.
Right.
And to strike upon a panel or just a single image sometimes. And often they're just wonderfully painted or pecked or scratched, because we have a lot of scratched images too. In fact, at the Great Gallery, there's probably, several dozen scratched little figures.
Little tiny figures.
Yeah, there's like somebody came up. I don't know if you've ever been into a Catholic cathedral or church.
Yes, I have. I'm Catholic, as it turns out.
Yeah. In San Diego, there was some bronze statues of the Madonna and other people on the side of the altar.
Yeah.
And my mom had taken us down there to be baptized. This is a long story. When I was a kid, and while I was waiting for her to talk to the priest, I walked over to the statue of one of the saints, and I looked at their feet, and they didn't have any toes. Their feet were all shiny. People would come up and they would touch it. They would rub it. And it reminded me a lot of how Jewish people would put a rock on top of a sarcophagus.
Right. These
are archaic touching things, and that goes all the way back to our earliest days, I think. So when you see these kind of things and you are standing right there in front of them, and they have this quality, they're still kind of fresh. They may be faded, and they may even be part of them missing, but there's no footprints there. All there is the way it was ever since that they put that painting up. And I have a kind of an idea about this variations in style, so I have a kind of idea what are the earlier ones and what are the middle ones and what are the most recent.
Well, tell us a bit about that. How would you go about sorting the age of these barrier canyon styles and understanding which are earlier, which are intermediate, and which are late.
Okay, we have 2 dates by Alan Watchman, a fellow out of Australia, that's
Yes.
6750 and 6570, one at Black Dragon, which is a public site, and one at the Great Gallery. And then we have another date at the Great Gallery, 1800 BCE, by an archaeologist. And then I had heard from the Park Service that they had a date of CE 300. Now, I haven't seen that one, and I don't trust archaeologists' stylistic observations until I see them myself. So, but we do know of one barrier canyon style figure peck, rather large, about 5 feet tall, near Lake Powell, that has a bow and arrow. But I looked at it carefully. I'm not sure if the bow and arrow was put on later. But anyway, we have those kind of dates. It took me 10 years and 200 sites before I could figure out the style. And I'm still learning variations.
It took you 10 years and how many visits?
200 sites before I started to feel confident that I knew what barrier canyon style figures look like. And figures are the easiest because you can compare a barrier canyon style figure to a basket maker figure, not all of them, but the major ones, and you can see the differences and you can see the similarities too.
So given that you have this expertise, what makes barrier canyon barrier canyon?
Okay, now if people want to see how I figured it out, they can go to the Utah Rock Art Research Association webpage, and they can go and get under publications and symposium papers, and it's alphabetical if you want it to be. And I have several presentations there. They're PDFs, and I have it laid out. So if you've ever seen these pictures of the birds, people that do bird watching, they'll have a bird up there and they have an arrow pointing to the beak and an arrow pointing to the head. And okay, that's exactly how you do it in rock art style. You look at the parts of the figure, and what I call them is representational motifs. So a shoulder is a motif, a head is a motif, the length of the body to the width of the body is a motif. The interior designs are motifs. For instance, a lot of barrier canyon figures have the parallel linear motif inside, and sometimes the figure is made up entirely of that. And that's a kind of a thing that's been going on. I think along with cupules and circles are the oldest images in the world. And I think everywhere there's been humans, there's been these kind of images. And they seem to be pretty consistent. The Hopi are still making them.
Right.
You see them in the kivas, and there's quite a bit of stories about how they do that. They've added on extra stuff to them, but the parallel lines essentially mean rain and water, and they can mean bodily fluids and breast milk and menstrual flow. They can, all the things that have to do with liquid have to do with that image. So we have several motifs. We have compositional motifs. For instance, I talked about the dog with the curved tail facing the figure. That's a compositional motif. Now, you'll see dogs and sheep with figures, but a lot of times they're indifferent unless the guy's got an arrow or bow and arrow and he's chasing the sheep. But in the Barrier Canyon, there's an intimate and a familiar relationship. It's like you and your dog. When you come home, your dog is there looking at you and wagging its tail. And you see this, I probably know a dozen, probably close to 24 places that have this same kind of compositional motif. You see a lot of animals floating over the head and shoulder. The Inuit shamans tell us that if you see an animal out of its environment, because sheep do not float, and neither do snakes, that means it's not a representation of a sheep or a snake, it's a representation of the spirit. And so we see this. In fact, as I call that period, and I don't know if it's all at the same time, so it's not necessarily a temporal period, but I call it the shaman period because we have these beautiful compositions, and including there's one at the Great Gallery on the upper wall, we call the Three Shamans. And it has these figures floating over, beautifully drawn. The Three Shamans are small figures, probably 10 inches high, maybe 12. And it's drawn. It's not painted, it's drawn. This is when I first saw this, this is what impressed me the most. Blown out. There's a perfectly drawn sheep. Now, to draw on a rock wall, which is not smooth, is not easy at all. Perfectly drawn. It's less than an inch wide.
Wow.
Less than an inch wide. And I looked at it and I thought, how did that person do that? I've been drawn for 50 years, and I knew that person who did that was a true artist.
Exactly. Well, it's a pleasure. I think we'll take a break. And then in our last segment, I think we're going to ask David to, give us some reflections and perspective on his many years of study and documentation and impressions. See you on the flip-flop, gang.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
Welcome back, Rock Art Podcasters. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, and I'm with David Sucec, director of the Barrier Canyon Style Project, and remarkable researcher, artist, and rock art scholar, I would say. David, welcome back for this last segment.
Thank you, Alan.
What do you think the most important thing is for our audience to understand about the Barrier Canyon style and your 30-year odyssey?
Well, one of the things that I think I run into this quite a bit, and sometimes in rock art conferences.
Okay.
A lot of times, especially people not really very sensitive to art, they think that these prehistoric people were not as sophisticated or as clever or as intellectual as we are. And, I even had that thought. But working on this project, I became impressed and constantly become impressed at how sophisticated and how clever these people were. And I'm not just talking about the art, but just how they lived, that they could make a living where they were. And even if you look at more contemporary times like the Pueblo Indians and how they would irrigate their fields and how they would capture water, like at Chaco Canyon, that all the tops of the mesas, they had channels coming down on the top and they could flood their fields. The way that they did that, I don't know hardly anybody. I might know 2 or 3 people out of the thousands of people I know that could even exist out in the wild by themselves for any amount of time.
So the perspective is that from studying indigenous people and their rock art and being impressed and really drilling down to the idiosyncrasies of style, character, subject matter, etc., you ultimately came away with a tremendous impression of their vitality, their intellectual gifts, and their creativeness. Am I correct?
Yes. I admire them greatly. And the ones that I've known, contemporary ones, the traditionalists, I've been very impressed with them. And I feel really for them that they really have to take the brunt of our cultural insensitivity much of the time.
So what is it about the Barrier Canyon style that has kept your interest for 30 years, David Sucec? That's a long time to be obsessed with a particular subject matter.
The same that as Rembrandt has kept my attention, and Leonardo and Picasso and Bill de Kooning. These are amazing visual images, and that I can't say how impressed I am that people that lived, they lived sometimes in caves, but they mostly lived when the weather was good out in just little wickiups, I think. We don't know for sure. We do have examples of their slab-lined pits that they roasted things in, so we can get some dates on that. And like Cowboy Cave, which is pretty well known amongst archaeologists, have the earliest dates that are what I call secure dates at 5600 BCE to about 4800 BCE for clay figurines that are in the Barrier Canyon style. So these kind of places we know they lived in, but we think they mostly lived in the winter, and then the rest of the time they were outside. And they lived low down by the Colorado River or some river during the summer, winter, and then they moved up with the seasons up to the top and lived up there for a while and harvested and came back down.
So what do both artists, photographers, rock art scholars, and others say about the Barrier Canyon style in terms of what they mean or how they functioned? What was the rationale or the motivation for creating such a remarkable set of images?
Well, there's not a lot of writing on them. I know there's a couple of people that are thinking about it or try to publish stuff. There's three kinds of figures in the Barrier Canyon style. There's what I call the spirit figures. That would be the Holy Ghost. They're usually without any arms or legs, and they a lot of times they're almost always elongated, and they almost look like they're hovering.
Right, they're floating, or sometimes they're called numinous, which means, spiritual and floating and ethereal. They're obviously supramundane beings of some sort.
I think they're sacred images. I think that term numinous is a good one. Okay. And I think that all groups, even if they weren't descendants of the Barrier Canyon, feel that they're very sacred. And just to be there is sacred. And, that's why sometimes it's hard for me on things like Facebook, and when I hear people making jokes about them and giving them trivial names or calling them aliens and stuff like that, I just think they don't appreciate the sacredness of these images. And, I would not go into someone's church or in someone's faith and ridicule them or make fun of them with that kind of thing. So that's one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
If you're on Facebook, you have to get used to that. But images are really very powerful. And
so you said there's three different kinds of images.
Yeah, there's spirit figure, and that's about 95% of all the images, figure images. Then there's what I call the composite figures. Eckhart Malachy has a big term for it, but I really prefer plain language when I talk about them. And composite figures is made up of body parts of different species. So one of the more favorite ones is what we call the ascending sheep panel. It's probably a shaman with a sheep's head, female sheep's head, a snake's tongue, human body, human legs, and it is composite of those. Now, these kind of images that are associated with animals that are coming to them rather than indifferent to them or fleeing away, I call these images from the shaman period. We have a couple of dozen of these kind of sites, panels. And then we finally have what I call the citizen figure, which is a regular figure with arms and legs and usually active, and they have always elongated bodies. That's one of the main characteristics of Barrier Canyon figures, that all of the figures, whether they be spirit figure, composite figure, or citizen figure, tend to be elongated.
And why do you think that's so? What was the meaning, the function of elongation?
Well, I don't know how they thought about it, but I do know I've read stuff that when people have visions or they have those kind of numinous experiences, they tend to be elongated. I don't know if that's true or not. But let me make another point, which is critical. It's not the original intention of the image maker is important and needs to be studied. And that's what art history does, and that's what archaeology does. And archaeology is to anthropology is art history is to art. Art is the big thing. Anthropology is the big thing. Archaeology is the before, and art history is the time before. So their job is to do that. But one of the things we have to know is that the image never dies. Even though the original intention, and I could tell you about, as an image maker myself, that if everybody thinks that anybody that makes an image always knows what they're doing, even though you think what they're intending, there's other things going on that they're not aware of. And I know that to be true. But the images that we see today and how we see them are important. And they're not to deny what the intention of the original artist, but they are important and legitimate. And even though that's why I get upset when people say aliens and make fun of them, Bart Simpson, somebody said today, because in order to do it the right way, we have to take into consideration that these are sacred images or numinous images, and that we need to approach them that way. But what you see in it and what I see in it is what we see in it, and that counts. That's part of the big picture. So the whole picture is all the way from its origination all the way up until today. And as long as someone's looking at it, it's alive. It's not dead. The people who made it might be dead, but what they made lives on, just like a great poem or just like a piece of architecture or a great painting by a Renaissance master. As long as you're living on them, they live on, and you bring to it what it is you know about and what is inside you. And that's part of it as well. Now, when you can do what you're doing and what I'm trying to do, if you're trying to connect with that people, with those early times, It's a much fuller experience than just saying, oh, that looks like Bart Simpson.
You know, it's funny because I'm Catholic and I attend these homilies on Sunday, and sometimes I come away with some ideas that relate to my study of rock art. And twice there was a set of words that I heard that sort of touched my heart, and I think have come to my mind to characterize rock art. One is called, I call them places of, their memory palaces is one, and the other is their images of personal immortality. So I like those particular set of words, you know, a word picture or some sort of a word concept to sort of capture what we're talking about when we talk about these images. Do you like those? Do you like those words?
Those are both good phrases, I think. I think that matches well.
Yeah.
You know, the thing is, people that live in California, they have different experiences in rock art than we have. We have deep canyons, and they wind sometimes for 30 miles. And in them, there will be seeps and springs and animals. And these are mostly private places. Of course, if you go to the Great Gallery, you'll see people. But if you go to some of the out canyons where the sites are not public, you have to find them yourself. You're really going back. I feel like the time period extends from me all the way back. Like when I'm standing in a room, I know, but I can see from one end of the room to the other, except it's much longer. That's an amazing experience to have. And you can only have that in a place where nobody else is there except the wild animals and plants and wind and rain and all of the other stuff.
So you get this sense of timelessness, or some sort of what would you call it? A sort of a time tunnel, and that you've instantaneously sort of been thrown back into hundreds or even thousands of years ago. And you're right next to this image where someone stood, someone painted, someone previously saw this image and respected it, treasured it, etc., and had a relationship with this particular drawing.
Yeah, I would call it connectivity.
Okay.
You feel that, like you were in a room, you can feel your sense that you're in the whole room. Even if you're standing in part of it, your whole sense takes in that room. And sometimes that happens. That's where Clifford Duncan said, when he said he would stand in front of the painting or the pecking, he would be standing in the footsteps of the ancient. He felt that. This was not just an abstract concept. He felt that. And that's the thing about the Utah canyons. And they're in Colorado and in Arizona and New Mexico and some even in Wyoming. You get to these places where there aren't any other people and you find something that you know was done by an ancient. That is an amazing experience. If I could bottle that and sell it, I could get rich.
You know, it's funny. My obsession has been just like yours with the Barrier Canyon style. I've been obsessed with Coso rock art for most of my adult life. When I leave there, I say I've got the Coso glow. And there's something about being in the canyon or seeing those kind of images that sticks with you for quite a while. Yeah. And you get a sense of this timelessness, but the connection and also certain images you almost can't shake them out of your mind. Have you had that experience?
Oh yeah. I mean, they just come over one after another, especially if I'm working on some images and I'm looking at all these memories and these feelings. I mean, it's this bodily feeling and this mental experience. That's what happens if you see the thing. Now, if you see the image of it rather than see it in life and standing in front of it or walking through a canyon that's 300 feet high, the walls, when you see that, when you have that experience, that's really a different experience. You can still love and appreciate the images looking in a book or on a slide or in a PowerPoint thing, but there's no way you can get that experience that Clifford Duncan said was standing in the footsteps of the ancient.
No, I agree.
Powerful experience to him.
Yeah. I remember when I saw one of the Barrier Canyon images, I think it's called the Black Dragon, right?
Right.
Which it has that animal, and it looks like it's this smaller animal, which looks dog-like in appearance, looks like it's supplicating to these enormous ethereal numinous beings.
Yeah.
I got out of the vehicle and I got vertigo because of just the craziness of the landscape. You have that enormous, concave, convex kind of flipped over element. And the whole area seems like it's been turned upside down or it's not on this earth.
Well, the scale of our canyons, that's quite different. Is you're just enclosed in them. I would recommend anybody to get to the Great Gallery. That's the best one. You will have to share it probably, unless you go on a weekday, even then. But the other ones, the Buckhorn Wash panel, you can Google that, and the Thompson Springs, you can Google that. Both of those are drive-ins, and you will see, like at the Buckhorn, there was at least 24 different episodes of painting.
That's
and
amazing.
In some of them, they would paint 4 or 5 figures, and then the variations of the figures are really quite extreme.
David, we're running out of time, but I want to give you a chance to, in a minute or two, sign off and tell people what they should remember about this scholarly interview with David Sucec on the Barrier Canyon rock art style.
Well, I hope you remember that my enthusiasm for these, and I've been in art for 60 years almost, and probably a little bit more than that. And I've been looking at everything from the ancient Western stuff to ancient American stuff to contemporary stuff. And I can tell you, these are things that if you can get yourself to them, you're going to have experiences. If you'll open your mind, you have to forget about things. That's the thing about art. One of the things that I like, a little statement, to see means that you have to forget what you're seeing. If you have an idea what you're looking at, you're not going to see what's there. You're going to see what you think is there. So you have to somehow empty your mind out and give up all of your concepts and all of your notions about what's going on, and just to look at the thing and spend some time letting it say something to you. And if you can do that, and that's the secret of making art, by the way, is that you have to get rid of all your notions about art in order to make art.
Wonderful. David, it's been an honor and a pleasure having you as our guest scholar today. For all you folks out in rock art and archaeology podcast land, I'll see you next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. You can find this podcast on the educational podcast app Lyceum, Lyceum, and wherever you find podcasts. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV Traveling America, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.